Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gill Gross, with Alex Gruskin in for Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. I know we said that Joel was returning this week. Make that next week. Slight delay in the proceedings, but a fellow member of the Tennis Channel podcast network times three, Alex Gruskin of Cracked Racquets, Mini Break Pod, Great Shot Pod, Cracked Interviews podcast, a content machine. And glad to have you on Three. Welcome to the show.
Oh, glad to be back. I know you're not supposed to admit to crimes, but I'll admit I killed Joel. I've been looking for this seat, and so that's why he's not back this week. He might not be back for a few weeks after that either. But no, it is a pleasure to be here. It was so funny. I was fortunate enough. This is how deep in the bench they are right now, looking for people to talk about Novak Djokovic, that they're like, get Gruskin on television. And, I did the hit and I sent it to my parents because that's what you do. And immediately the first only response my dad has is, oh, well, at least they pronounced your last name right. And I was like, that's it? That's your response to all of this? And so I'll say this, if he sees this, Gill, you nailed the last name. It's a pleasure to see you as always. And Amy, it is great to see you as well.
Good to see you. Good. How many banners of content are you broadcasting under, by the way? Well, you've got Cracked Interviews, Great Shot.
Were you impressed? I just rattled them all off.
Yes, Gill. Did you do prep for this?
Well, I actually, when I'm asked by women at the bar, well, what do you do for a living? I go, well, I host the Cracked Interviews podcast, Great Shot podcast, Mini Break podcast. I'm a guest now on Three, a tennis show. I can tell you all about the Iowa State 5 singles player. And then they're like, all right, on to the next one. Like, good meeting you. I know this is a YouTube podcast. I think listeners will see the lack of sleep I've enjoyed these past couple of days. But, again, those who can't do speak about doing. And so that's what I do best.
All right. Well, pace yourself over there. But for now, let's move on to Rafael Nadal, who is 2-0 without dropping a set through to round 3. A win over Marcos Giron in round 1, where the tightest set was 6-4 in the second. And then a win over Yannik Hanfmann, the qualifier from Germany, in round 2. He won 6-2, 6-3. And then again, the tightest set, this time the third, was 6-4. Amy, impressions of Nadal's level and his opening 2 matches here in Australia?
Very impressed, especially since apparently he had a rough go of it with COVID and was not able to do his usual prep that he likes to do physically before he came to Australia. But I want to just take over the podcast and just jump in with something, because I've got kind of a bone to pick with the broadcasters of the matches, because I've been hearing this over and over again in Rafa's matches, and that is that he's getting older now and he needs to shorten the points, right? Well, what I do, some of the writing that I do, I like to bust myths. So I thought it was interesting that he played this guy Hanfmann, kind of I don't know, maybe you know him, Alex, but for me, he's kind of a random, guy. And he had played this guy at Roland Garros in 2019, and I happened to be at that match. So I thought, isn't this interesting? I can just compare and contrast. And when I looked at the numbers, despite the fact that you would be expecting the points to be longer on clay, there were actually more long points played at the Australian Open. And Rafa is winning more short points. He was winning a higher percentage of short points at Roland Garros. So he's not, you guys play tennis. The second you say to yourself, I'm going to try to shorten the points, that's when you start losing the points. And that's not Rafa anyway. So I just wanted to start off with, he's not trying to shorten the points.
I would say you would have to go back further and compare, because in 2019, it was already Carlos Moya era. And I would argue there was already an effort to shorten the points. But I guess we can get into kind of the physical nature of Nadal and how he looks in that sense, and what are his limitations or lack thereof of limitations on that front. But Alex, you want to respond?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you make, Amy. And I know he's the Lord Voldemort of this podcast, but I think this applies to Andy Murray as well. There's a perception that because they are older, because physically are they the same athletes they were at 26, 27 years old? I think it's safe to say the answer to that is probably not, that they should make a concerted effort to shorten points. I would very much agree with you. That mindset of I am tracking down every extra ball, of I don't care what this does to my body 2 sets from now, I'm winning this point right now. That's been essential to their game since the beginning. And to ask them to turn that switch off is, hypocritical. It's just like, it is antithetical to their being. And so I agree there's a fine line between efficiency and recklessness, but their ability to navigate that line is what has made them special throughout the course of their careers. And so to Gill's point, I don't like, how much shorter do you want Rafa to make the point? Would you like him to just hit aces on every point? Like, sure, I guess that's one option, but he's already taken the +1 balls. He's already moving forward more than he did. I don't know how much shorter things could get. And to your point as well, like, I think him working things out physically in these first 2 matches has been the most critical development to his game.
And to be fair, Gill, I looked at an extremely small sample size. I would need to go to some of the 5-set matches and look in that 5th set and see, okay, is Rafa like out of gas, and is he here clearly looking to shorten the points or looking to come in more would be one indication. But I just thought it was interesting. I had sort of an apples to apples comparison with this Hanfmann. It was 2, 3, and 4 last night that Rafa won, and it was 2, 1, and 3 that he won at the French Open. And it was the same guy. And, the matches were eerily similar in terms of the rally length breakdown.
Yeah. And just to add on the Hanfmann piece, because to your point, I do happen to know him a bit, and he's a guy who, because I know a lot of 3 listeners are big college tennis fans, clinched the 2012 NCAA championship for USC. And for whatever it's worth, I have a theory that, anyone who's been the best at anything or has done something like that, it inevitably helps you in a big stage like this moving forward. And he clinched what was the 4-peat for that USC team, 4 consecutive NCAA titles, and eventually rose to an All-American, top guy in college tennis. And the reason I bring all of this up is you see that aggressiveness in his game, his willingness to move forward. And I know you look at the statistics last night, I think he was only 16 of 27 on net points. It felt like he imposed himself moving forward more than that, though. And I would argue Hanfmann has a top 3 kick serve in all of tennis, just his ability to open up angle on that ad side. And what he did so well yesterday was move forward and take, when Rafa was plopped back on the fence like he likes to be. I think Hanfmann's uniquely suited to take advantage of that court positioning. And I think he did it. And Gill, I'm curious your thoughts, because, again, it was straight sets, but it was a 2.5 hour, 3-hour straight set victory. I don't think Rafa has looked that great thus far. I think he's looked fine. I don't know if he's looked Grand Slam winning good, because last night it was like there is a vulnerability. Hanfmann identified it. He tried to attack it, and to some degree he had some success.
I liked Nadal's win against Hanfmann because I do feel like it was against an opponent who was playing his best. And it's not a top 20 player at their best, but it was Yannik Hanfmann at his best. And it was a good match. It was a competitive match. But matchup wise, you mentioned the kick serve. That was one thing I was looking at. And it was like, okay, this is a 2nd round match, because Hanfmann, he's a kick serve to the backhand guy, and Nadal's a lefty. So it became kick serve to the forehand. And it was like, okay, like you need another serve against Rafa. He didn't really have that. And I didn't think he was getting that much out of his serve compared to what he usually gets against your average opponent. And that's the kind of advantage where I feel like, you're going to need to match up a little bit better with Nadal. You got to get more out of your serve. I thought from the baseline, when the rallies were somewhat rhythmic, when things were in volleyball, this is crazy, I can't believe I'm using this analogy, but in volleyball there's in system where kind of everything is going according to plan. When the rallies were in system, I thought they were pretty competitive and pretty even, but Nadal's hands and his feel, his cat and mouse play was so many levels above Hanfmann. I felt like when either player was at the net, when either player sliced, Nadal's slice gave Hanfmann fits. When either player went to net and it became about passing shots and volleys and lobs, that's where I thought Nadal was winning at a really, really high clip. That's kind of how I saw the match and how Rafa separated himself in my eyes.
You know, it's interesting. I just want to point out that I've talked to a few coaches down there, and the first question I ask is, what's the surface like this year? And, you know, in years past, we've heard it's so fast, it's like glass, or it's like ice out there. I've had at least 3 people tell me that it's slower than it usually is. So, you know, that may benefit Rafa.
I would also add just in the first, you know, the difference between the two performances for Rafa. I actually thought the first one was the more impressive of the two, simply because he did what he has done so frequently through his career, where it looks like he's playing a different sport than Marcos Giron was, and as physically pressed, you know, because Marcos Giron, I have to say, in the second set left everything on the court in that 6-4 second set and emptied the tank, was trying to take every ball early on the rise, not let that Rafa forehand get above his backhand shoulder. It is worth noting, and I know Hanfmann is uniquely suited to do this because, like I think many modern players in the men's game are, he's 6'5", and he's more than comfortable hitting through that backhand wing. And I just thought from a matchup perspective, that's why when I move forward, and my takeaway from this match is the Rafa forehand, I don't want to say it was attackable because he won this match, but it wasn't dynamite. And you look at the guys moving forward, Zverev's 6'5", you know, Medvedev's 6'5". And I just don't know if his forehand has the sting on it, Amy, that it once did. And I know you've looked at these sorts of things, and I'm just curious, again, whether it's the eye perspective, the metrics, like yes, Rafa's still winning in straight sets, but to your point about the French Open matchup versus this one for Rafa, this one just felt more laborious. Like this one felt more difficult than the last time he played Hanfmann.
Yeah, and there were more points played 9+ in this one, definitely. But again, I'm hearing that the surface is taking the spin just a little bit more than it has in the past. So that would be benefit Rafa. But look, I mean, he is older. He's not the favorite, Alex. I mean, let's be honest here. He's got a plus, you know, it's a tough draw for him. I think he was lucky that Khachanov went out of the tournament. Okay,
I thought
ahead.
Khachanov, if I could jump in on that development, I thought Khachanov was playing incredible as well. I put him as a dark horse, but the difference between Khachanov and Hanfmann is the backhand side. And it's when Rafa goes to that cross-court forehand to the righty backhand, that pattern that you probably see, quite frankly, more than any other pattern over the course of any Rafa Nadal match, is just his cross-court forehand to a right-hander's backhand. That's one area where there's no doubt Hanfmann on any day is better than Khachanov, who's a forehand guy. So I'm just saying, I think it might have been a tougher matchup, and we're going to get to this, but if you look at his draw, Karen Khachanov, Aslan Karatsev, Alexander Zverev, all guys in his quarter, backhand guys. So that's the question. I'm also looking at the forehand, and is Nadal protecting it, or is it getting picked off? Are these right-handers with great two-handers stepping in and applying pressure and not only protecting the backhand, but doing damage with their backhand and rushing off the backhand?
I really want to get invited back to this show someday, but can we just take a moment to acknowledge you called them backhand guys? That's just delightful. Like, I'm locking that in. You will see. I think we're on the record on Twitter later today. You will see at AL Gruskin me refer to the backhand guys. I also like drop it. You know, I don't want, like, you talk about the rigorousness of the Rafa forehand to righties backhand patterns. I don't want to be, you know, burned at the stake by 3 listeners. Why I will say I am not drawn to the Rafa Federer match. You know, there's not a gravitational pull to me when they're playing. I could tell you how every single point is going to unfold in that match. And it helps that we've seen it 40 plus times, but like, you know exactly what Rafa's going to do with his forehand into that Federer backhand. You know exactly when he's going to pull the trigger and change direction and go down the line or go inside in, or, you know, exactly, oh, I'm going to hit the elevated backhand down the line to your one hand, or just a little, you know, relaxed, you know, easy rhythm ball there. It's like, I've seen that. I know what that looks like. And to get to the broader point here again with the backhand guys coming up, like, is that going to work against them? Zverev's going to tee off on that ball. You know, Khachanov, I think, is moving really well right now, just going after the forehand. That's a really interesting first test, and I can't believe I forgot about him. Again, there's potentially 3 6'6" behemoths who are all better at hitting the backhand than Hanfmann, waiting, you know, lurking in Rafa's draw. I think that is something fascinating as we look forward at this event for him, is just like, how does he have enough sting in his shots? Is this surface too slow, or will he be able to power through it?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this on this show before, Gill, the fact that he has Moya, and Moya is a data guy, he'll be able to scout each opponent. And a lot of these guys like Khachanov, and even the guys with forehands that you think don't go near that guy's forehand, it's actually, you want to hit to the guy's forehand because he may hit more winners off that wing, but he also makes a ton of more errors off that wing. So each individual opponent will be scouted, and I can guarantee you Khachanov has vulnerability on that forehand. So you know, look for it, because Rafa had to play Cressy in that final of that 250 a week or two ago, right? And I'm like, okay, here he has to play a serve and volleyer, and it's going to be dip it to his feet every single time. Now, look, he's Nadal. He has the ability to do this, but he's been sick, and I want to see him execute this. Well, he sure did. I mean, nothing stopped him. He was able to dip that ball with such discipline over and over and over until he got what he wanted. The guy has all the shots.
Yeah, he certainly does. It'll be interesting in the Khachanov matchup. They did play a good 4-setter at the US Open a couple of years back, which was incredibly competitive. And it's certainly a matchup that is similar to Hanfmann, Alex.
Well, this is a fascinating matchup to me, and just for the record, because I don't want to let it slide. So Khachanov's a backhand guy, Moya's a data guy. What does that make Gill and I? Like, are we eyebrow guys? Like, is that what our thing is? We're the eyebrow guys. I'll take that. No, I would point to even a match more recent. I think it might have been the same year as that US Open match you're referring to, 2019 Indian Wells. And I will admit, I'm a nerd for remembering this match. I apologize to all of you, but it was quarterfinals, I believe, of that 2019 Indian Wells. Khachanov is up a set and a break, and Rafa starts grabbing his knee, and it looks like he's injured, and he's sort of cramping, and he's not really moving, and Khachanov just folded. And just there, Khachanov, he was like, do I just start making balls? Should I be a bit more aggressive? What do I do here? He had no idea how to approach the situation. Rafa ends up coming back and winning the match in 3 sets. And I'm not saying it's a direct correlation, but you can draw a through line from Khachanov's struggles since that match to now. I legitimately think that broke his confidence a bit because he had Rafa down and out. And I do think, again, backhand guy, it's a good matchup. Like, the ball is in his strike zone, and just you can't fake being 6'6". That's why when we look at these 3rd round matches, a lot of love's going to go to Alcaraz Berrettini. Yeah, I think I know what that one's going to look like. I have no idea what this Khachanov Nadal match is going to look like, and I'm really interested to find out.
Good matchup, and I agree with you for Khachanov, but he's 0-7. Nadal's gotten him every single time, and if anyone's up in arms, how could you call it a good matchup? Nadal's a better player, right? There can be a good matchup, and you can be 0-7. Sometimes the better player is able to overcome even when the weaknesses and the strengths line up in a way that is favorable to the lesser, to the lesser player. We will put that conversation on the side burner and move on to Novak Djokovic, because it is our first show since the final decision was cast down that Novak was not going to be able to play the Australian Open, that his visa recancellation was indeed upheld by the courts. Amy, is there anything you just want to say on that front to kind of put a bow on the entire ordeal? And
Oh,
I
how do
mean,
you put a
look,
bow
that's
on
hard.
it?
Exactly. Don't put
Make
a
it
bow.
look pretty.
It's too
No.
much. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't put a bow. How about this? Why don't you try to put a bow on just Sunday forward, because way too much has happened in the last 2 weeks to
Yeah.
possibly put a bow on.
I was trying to tell this story on Twitter. I'll just tell you guys a quick story. A couple of days ago, after Novak was deported, I went to play tennis with a friend, and we started talking about the Djokovic thing. And she said, well, he got the medical exemption. And I was like, yeah, in the beginning, he got the medical exemption. And then, once he was deported, and she goes, deported? What are you talking about? She stopped paying attention after the Instagram post. She just checked out. And there's a lot of people, super casual fans, that were not following this the same way that we were. Like all the ins and outs and twists and turns. So I think it's important to realize that we're super, super close to this, but the world at large and the more casual fan maybe just sort of knows the basics. So there's that. Secondly, I don't want us in the tennis world to hand wring so much about particularly Roland Garros, because I think that we're going to possibly be living in a much different world 2-3 months from now. And maybe vaccine status is not going to be so front and center. I mean, maybe the way that the Omicron wave is tracking, maybe we're coming out of it. So I guess my point is, I don't want to waste too much time worrying about what's going to happen to Novak.
Love that. Love that. I kind of agree. It's like the French government says something now, and it's a news story. Why? Can we worry about this in 2 months?
Yeah.
Like the way this situation is, it now in general, again, like, is there going to perhaps be a situation where Djokovic's 2022 is completely hijacked by vaccine mandates? And, does the decision get harder and harder for him to take the shot or to not, if that becomes the case? Yeah. But I completely share the desire to not worry about that right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair sentiment from both of you. I would agree with that. And by the way, it's just an excuse for all of us to once again tweet out, can't we just focus on the tennis? Like, because we haven't had that wave happen recently. But, I know it's not a joking matter. The amount, to your first point, Amy, the amount of people in my life, and I do think it's over 50, who have texted me and, said, hey man, Novak's Djokovic. And it's like, to all of them, I say, oh man, you're the first who's ever thought of that. Like, that's genius. And you're just like, that is where people are checking in on this story. And to your point, I mean, it is significant. Like the fact that the French government are trying to make, and again, it's Novak Djokovic, like it or not, has become a symbol for, a political martyr for those who think, governments are being too restrictive when it comes to COVID. And as such, when the government discusses in France, we shouldn't allow unvaccinated people to enter the country for sport, it's implicitly a reference to Novak Djokovic, because he has become the symbol of those sorts of political decisions. And obviously for Novak Djokovic, that's just tremendously unfortunate and such a shame. And I think, unfortunately, a byproduct of some of the decisions that he's made. That said, for us tennis fans and us following the action, you guys have nailed it. Like, not much I can add other than to say, all right, remember when we had this lockdown or this restriction in place 6 months ago and we no longer do? Or remember when we thought we were going to do this, but instead we ended up doing this? As we've learned throughout the pandemic, fluidity is key. And that sucks for planning, and that sucks for coordination. And I continue to think the most direct and simple way to remove any gray area is to institute a vaccine mandate. Just say, hey, you're vaxxed, you play, you aren't, you don't. And that's the simplest solution, because no gray area there. That said, short of the tours doing that, I think these stories keep emerging, right? Like, how else do you combat them?
Gill, the one thing that, and you guys pay a lot more attention to rankings points than I do. I got enough numbers in my head. The one thing that I'm not sure about is, let's say Medvedev wins the tournament, wins the Australian Open. Is Novak's #1 ranking safe or not? Do we know that?
No, it's gone. If Zverev or
It's gone.
Medvedev wins the tournament, they become world #1.
Okay. I mean, I just, you know, then we'll have Indian Wells, and the rankings and stuff are all still kind of wonky because Indian Wells was in October, but you know, Djokovic has a home in Miami, so he'll at the very least probably want to play Miami. And first order of business would be getting into the United States. And I know that on Eurosport, Barbara Schett, who's a commentator, former player, commentator now, I think for Eurosport, said that Djokovic has been banned by the Australian government, therefore he's going to be flagged coming into the US, and said that he would have a visa problem there. Well, I looked into that. I talked with our friendly immigration attorney who's a viewer of our show. Hi, you know who you are. He said actually that's not a problem, but so many of these decisions are made by the immigration officer in the moment. So if there's something about your visa that raises a flag, that officer has a lot of power to say, I'm not letting you in. So I think he's going to need some diplomatic help. He might want to contact the Serbian embassy in Washington, D.C. And his first order of business, I think, so that he can protect his ranking points and do all that, is figure out how to get into the US.
I love this. There are backhand guys, eyebrow guys, data guys. Now we have immigration guys on this show. We go deep. It's a deep roster here.
Yeah.
And we've already murdered a co-host. Like this is good.
Lots of action.
Yeah.
Okay, let's also put that aside. And there will be, again, I don't think that story is going away, but I think everyone would be happy if it went away for just these 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I do, however, want to address Rafa Nadal's comments, and he's the only person who has been in the spotlight as far as the big three are concerned, answering. Roger Federer doesn't need to do press conferences right now because he's not playing matches.
Lucky for him.
Lucky him. Rafa Nadal has had to give his opinions on this whole Novak Djokovic saga, and they have been, I think, neutral would be a fair characterization of them. However, if you are a staunch supporter of Novak Djokovic in certain ways, neutral can be interpreted as anti, because you are not in support. And I thought, you know, Daniil Medvedev, same thing. His comments, very neutral, very down the middle. But where's the support? Some may ask. And I do feel like the fan rift, the fan tribalism, which, let's be honest, has been part of this big three era, a big part of it that's been very obvious and ever present. That is in a place right now where I feel like the temperature is pretty hot right now between Nadal and Djokovic, and if not the people, then just the fandoms. And a lot of that has to do with Nadal's comments, which is basically like, I feel sorry for the situation, but you could have been vaccinated, and that's kind of the stance. And you know, the decision has consequences, and that's basically, to paraphrase, where he's been. Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's fair that Nadal has taken criticism for the comments, Alex?
I think the people who are criticizing him should be taken less seriously. Like, absolutely. I think that's a nuanced take. What do you want Rafa to start weighing in on health policy moving forward? Like that's the alternative solution. You're say, actually, you know, if you've contracted COVID in the past 6 months, your antibody count, like, first of all, shout out to him, because it would sound brilliant coming out in his accent. I think that, like, again, I think there are people to indict. It's the lack of leadership from the tours. I talk about the lack of a vaccine mandate that creates gray area. Just simply put, there's a lot of gray area. Craig Tiley, I'm sure I know he's been discussed on this show in the past. He's been discussed everywhere. The players all love Tennis Australia. It's clear the accommodations are exceptional. They've done a lot for promoting various causes at the Australian Open. And, you know, they've got 7-minute extended highlights for pretty much every match on their YouTube channel. That's the gold standard. Every slam has to do that moving forward. That said, the lack of leadership from all these various entities undeniably led us to where we're at today. And so I think any sort of measured response is thrown out the window because people are looking for blame. Who can I blame for the situation that you're in? And, I was joking about this with you all beforehand. You bring anything up about vaccines in your mentions as it pertains to tennis, you're going to get the people who accuse you of being a shill of the pharmaceutical companies. You're going to get the people who accuse you of being a globalist, to which I say, you don't have to use coded terms. I'm Jewish. You can just say it. Like, you don't have to call me a globalist. But like, it's all of these different things where it's of course a polarizing topic that tennis has been drawn into. Anyone who's criticizing Rafa did not listen to the nuance of his comments, which is to say Djokovic made a decision, decisions have consequences. Like, that's a second grade teacher. That's not a critical, that's what you learn as a human. Decisions have consequences. So yes, I would say it's absurd. I know that was a bit there. Curious what you guys think.
Sure. Okay.
I agree with you 100%. I think Rafa handled it really well. I like to say that I call it like I see it. And all he did was answer questions that he was asked in a pretty succinct and fairly neutral way. Still following, what he believes is the science and is the right thing to do, which is get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. I said earlier on an earlier podcast that I would like to see the Djokovic followers be less polarized in terms of the politics and see more nuance and say, you know what, our guy messed up in a couple of situations and all this, including being around people after he tested positive without a mask and distancing. So, just like you would your own child, you call them out and you say, you did a bad thing, but I still love you. I'd like to see more of that and less of the political lineup behind. And now it's like the right is with Djokovic and the left is with everybody else. And that doesn't really jibe with who Novak is, because Novak is really into climate change and environmental issues and things like that. And that's politically not a right issue. That's not a Tennis Sangren, John Isner issue, so it doesn't fit. So I'd like to see less polarization and more calm nuance.
Yeah. I guess I'm on your side with defending Nadal or defending any player in this case. The expectation that the professional pros here, the professional players, were going to be any different from the fans in the sense that they were going to unite on this issue and all see it the same way was never a realistic expectation. I never understood that. And I know that there have been comments from the Serbian players that have been kind of amplified in support of Novak Djokovic, but also in some cases understanding that not everyone in the locker room is there. And that's just how it is. These are just people, and you're not going to get everyone agreeing on this. So it's time to just accept that there is not going to be a unified defend Novak Djokovic in press conferences and as in terms of taking public stances. And then, by the way, for anyone who did the Naomi Osaka and was like, is my opinion really going to help anything or no comment? I so get that. And I think that's totally fine. Again, human beings, just put yourself in their shoes. When they weigh in on a controversial topic, what do they get out of it? Nothing. What's the downside? Their mentions get blown up. They get fans, their own fans that want to support them, perhaps disappointed, perhaps happy, but you polarize people. If you don't have any interest in that, okay, I get it. Like, do you think it's fun to have these people have Instagram and Twitter on their phone? They see these articles that are written off of their quotes about a controversial topic. Do you think that's pleasant? Like, do you think they want that? No, like, they're human beings. So if they want to say no comment, I get it. Now, if you feel strongly about something and you have a personal stake in it that you want to insert yourself and have a message that you want to get across, respect. respect that way also.
So can I push back a bit on that?
Sure.
I think there's a fine line. I think the way you are presenting it, where if a player says respectfully, I don't feel educated enough in the topic to discuss it, I would appreciate if we could move on because I don't feel I have any value added to this conversation. If a player came to the microphone and uttered those words, standing up in the press room, I mean, Rothenberg goes shirtless, and I can say that because he's my friend, and just everyone would start waving the towels, and like that would be a nuance that, quite frankly, will never happen. I think there's a fine line between that and being disrespectful to where players say, I'm not answering that question. I don't want to answer that question. I'm not answering that one. Are you kidding? I don't like the framing of that question.
No one's been disrespectful, right?
Well,
sometimes they're disrespectful on Twitter after the fact.
Yeah, I just think the sass related to that is unnecessary. Now, I agree. Like, nuance dies, particularly once it's aggregated and put out onto a Twitter article. And to your point, like I could understand a player being like, I don't really want to dive into that. I, again, respectfully decline to answer this question. I think sometimes though, sorry, Riley Opelka, whom I like personally, and I would say this too as well. Like the idea of, I would say what I want to say, but I don't want to get canceled. That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. And so if you have, again, I always say, I don't care what your opinion is, stand by the confidence of your convictions. If you have the confidence in your convictions, we can vehemently disagree, but at least there's a man with the confidence of his convictions.
Okay.
Or like that to me is where the difference is.
Sure. Can I make one more distinction?
Please.
If it doesn't have to do with you, because if you're in the mix, like if Craig Tiley said no comment, completely different. Naomi Osaka has nothing to do with this. This is not her problem. So if she wants to say no comment, because people want to use her name and get her opinion, microphone her opinion or megaphone her opinion out to the world. And she doesn't have any interest in that. I get that. I also don't blame the journalist who asks. Naomi Osaka is a figure in this sport who is extremely important, as is Rafael Nadal. And if I'm in the press room, I'm also asking. But if they don't want to answer, this has nothing to do with them, and it does not help them at all to answer. So I think cool.
Fundamentally, though, that's the key thing is they have to respect the press person for asking the question, because if you have the platform and, there's a Messiah complex to Novak Djokovic, we can tackle if I ever get the call back. And I feel like right now, B+, A- in terms of this performance. But, if you are going to take on that persona and you are going to have the adulation and rewards that come with it, you have the platform to where people are following your lead. You are going to be asked. It's the responsibility of journalists to ask these questions. And I think fundamentally to criticize the journalist, which often happens in this case, is just incorrect. Like, it is a fair question to ask. I would ask it. I think all three of us here would ask it. And again, respectfully, I'm going to decline to answer because I don't feel educated enough to share my opinion. Bravo. Fair.
Okay, I want to end this episode on a more tennis-like upbeat note. I don't know how upbeat this is. What do we make of just Nadal's section? I think some of the top seeds looking a little bit more vulnerable than we thought outside of Zverev.
It's tough. I mean, again, you look at this quarter of the draw. I mean, certainly Zverev stands out as the threat looming above all else, but Hurkacz's getting I would argue the Hubie loss
and that's what I was forgetting. Hurkacz out. I
would argue that loss is maybe the only upset we've actually seen this tournament. Coco Gauff getting upset, that one felt a little funky, but like Cordanori, not that weird. Cressy Isner, not that weird. Keys over Kenin, not that weird. Kvitova hasn't been playing that great. Like the Hurkacz one was the first one I look at and go, whoa, where did that one come from? I mean, look, in principle, Karatsev should have some time to hopefully find his footing again. And like Karatsev was a semifinalist here last year. He has proven on this surface, these conditions, 3 out of 5, it can bring out his best tennis. I don't think that would be, again, I think it is still a gauntlet for Rafa if things hold seed the rest of the way, because to go Khachanov, the shot making of Karatsev, then the physicality likely of a Zverev, or even an Opelka who's serving lights out right now, I don't put Chapo has just not played well enough to be included in this conversation.
Yep. I
still think it's pretty tough. Like, I think he'll have time to work himself into shape, but like now's the time. It's time to start rolling.
Gill, the one thing that I would watch is in the next match or two, assuming that Rafa can get through, how many sets is he playing? How many points is he playing? What kind of effort is he expending? And, look at his feet. Look at how he carries himself on the court. And do you discern any little problem that he might be having? And I think his goal is not only to get through, but get through efficiently.
I agree. So the path to efficient progress and the hopes of Rafael Nadal begins against Karen Khachanov, or first, doesn't begin, but the next stop is Karen Khachanov in the third round. We will continue to monitor Rafa's section. You also have, again, the winner of Mannarino and Karatsev. Mannarino is the man who beat Hurkacz. Shout out to him, because I don't think his name got in there, and he deserves the glory. And that's what's ahead for Nadal. I think that we wrapped up the Djokovic coverage for the Australian Open here, so it'll be the Nadal show from now on, which is, by the way, the first time that Rafa is in a major without Federer or Djokovic. So how about that? That'll do it for this episode of 3. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. Greatly appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, like the video, comment, and subscribe after this last Gruskin comment.
Well, just one, if I'm going to add anything to the 3 dynamic, because I was sleeping on this the whole time, and you're right, it's the one Rafa slam, right? I'm glad you mentioned that. But my theory, he's going to win one more. Here's how he does it. Jordan did this. Other great athletes have all done this. Shave the head, Rafa. Like, it's just time to let the bad boy go. And shaved head Rafa is a different beast. So that would be my final. Like, if I could offer anything to the big 3 dialect, shaved head Rafa is the missing component to this story.
Do you guys know do you know what Topics is?
Oh, yeah. We should do one on that.
Just to get him through the tournament. Just a little Topics.
And we will see you next time.